I never imagined that an innocent tropical vacation could become the prelude to a shocking journey into the depths of my heart. That paradise of white sand and crystal-clear waters, which should have given us days of peace and carefreeness, turned out to be a theater of contrasting emotions. Me, my husband Luca, and his father Antonio had been together for a week in a resort that seemed suspended in time. The air was pervaded by a salty sweetness. The sun caressed our skin, and every evening the sky was tinged with colors that seemed painted. But day after day, a shadow made its way into my mind, triggering a tension I never would have imagined. Luca was the image of thoughtfulness and kindness. I loved his reassuring smile and the way he always tried to make me happy. However, in the quiet of our evenings together, an unfamiliar feeling grew inside me, like a whisper that I couldn't ignore. Antonio, with his confident bearing and disarming charm, was a magnetic presence. His eyes, deep and warm, seemed to read inside me, and every gesture, every word, ignited something that I thought was dormant. I told myself that it was just a game of the mind, an illusion that would never continue. But fate, as we know, is a master at creating unexpected opportunities. The first came when Luca decided to join a group of friends for a game of golf. "Relax and enjoy the sun," he said, with a smile, before walking away. I was left alone with Antonio, who was reading a book on the terrace. The light wind moved the curtains, creating an intimate and enveloping atmosphere. "Do you want to go for a walk?" he asked, in that soft tone that seemed impossible to refuse. We walked along the shore, immersed in a landscape that seemed stolen from a dream. The sound of the waves was the background to his stories of youth, memories of a past lived with intensity and passion. Every word he spoke was a piece that added to the mosaic of an increasingly evident connection. When he showed me a distant point on the horizon, placing his hand on my back, a shiver ran through me, blurring the lines between what was right and what was wrong. That gesture, so simple and innocent, brought with it a load of emotions that I couldn't control. In the following days, that subtle tension became a constant companion. Antonio always found a way to spend time with me when Luca was away. Our lunches together were punctuated by smiles that lasted a moment too long. The walks turned into intense dialogues, and, during dips in the pool, our gazes seemed to seek each other with a complicity that I had never known. Every encounter with Antonio was an overwhelming mix of excitement and fear. There was something about him that made me feel alive, yet the rational part of me clung desperately to the memories of Luca, our love, and the moments we shared. One evening, while Luca was sleeping soundly on the lounge sofa, Antonio and I moved to the bar for a drink. The atmosphere was shrouded in silence that seemed to hold secrets. "You know," Antonio began with a faint smile, "I remember you from when you were young. Luca is really lucky to have you." Those words, spoken with a sincerity that transpired in the tone of his voice, affected me deeply. Our eyes met, and for a moment time seemed suspended. I felt a heat rise inside me, a flame that I wanted to put out, but that continued to burn, fueled by every look and every word. One afternoon, when Luca went out for a massage, Antonio invited me into his room to show me some old family photos. The idea of being alone with him made my heart tremble, yet I accepted. His room was filled with an aroma of wood and sea, and sunlight filtered softly through the curtains. He showed me images that told of his youth and his travels, each accompanied by an anecdote that revealed his depth and sensitivity. "We're not that different, are we?" he said, holding up a photo of him as a boy. His hand touched mine with a delicacy that seemed full of unexpressed meaning. I tried to say something, but the words faded away, drowned out by the intensity of that moment. With each passing day, my mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Antonio's presence became increasingly difficult to ignore, yet I struggled to maintain control, clinging to the awareness of what was at stake. And then that morning came. Luca had left early for a boat trip, leaving me alone with Antonio. He asked me to take a walk along the beach, and I couldn't find the strength to refuse. The landscape was breathtaking. The sun played with the waves, and the air was imbued with a sweetness that seemed to amplify every sensation. "You're different from many women I know," Antonio said, stopping to pick up a shell. "You have a light inside you." Those words reached me like a whisper straight to my heart, making me blush. I felt vulnerable, but also wanted in a way I had never felt before. As our faces grew closer, the line between desire and guilt dissolved. "We have to be careful," I managed to whisper, but my voice was shaking. Antonio looked at me with a smile that seemed to contain all the answers in the world. "There's something magical about this place," he said, and in that moment, with his hands touching my face, all that existed was that unbreakable bond that had transformed an innocent vacation into an experience I would never forget. It wasn't right, yet in that moment, the strength of desire had obscured every glimmer of rationality, every connection with reality. The fire that burned within me seemed impossible to put out, a flame fueled by every look, every breath that Giovanni and I shared. I approached him, my heart drumming in my chest, and he cocked his head. Our lips touched for an instant that seemed eternal, a delicate contact that broke every barrier. That first kiss was like lightning that pierced the night, unexpected, overwhelming, capable of changing everything. Our lips joined in a furtive dance, a rhythm that seemed born of an ancient and profound understanding. Reality faded, and for a moment only us existed, suspended in a universe of whispers and emotions. When we parted, our breathing was labored, and I saw my own turmoil reflected in his eyes. "We have to be careful," I said, but my voice was shaking under the weight of my emotions. Giovanni stared at me intensely. His tone was calm but full of disarming sincerity. "I know, but right now I just want to enjoy what's between us." Those words resonated inside me like a melody I couldn't ignore. They fed the fire that was already burning, making it more intense, more unstoppable. The following weeks were a succession of stolen encounters, of moments that defied time and space. Every time Marco walked away, every occasion that he left us alone, it became a chapter in a story that we didn't know how to end. Every look from Giovanni, every touch of his hands, seemed etched into my skin, and the tension between us grew with a strength I had never known. One afternoon, Marco asked me to accompany him for a couple's massage. I resorted to an excuse and stayed behind. Giovanni took the opportunity. "We should take advantage of this while Marco is away," he whispered, his eyes searching mine, filled with a desire that mirrored my own. We found ourselves in my room, the words flowing between us a sweet and dangerous whisper. His hands explored my body with a delicacy that made me tremble, and I abandoned myself completely to that moment. When Marco returned, Giovanni and I were still wrapped up in that secret world we had built for ourselves. Every day it became more difficult to hide what was happening. Every furtive glance with Giovanni, every stolen smile, was like walking on a thin thread suspended over the abyss. The nights were the hardest. Next to Marco, my mind was populated by images of Giovanni, of every moment we lived together. I felt torn between guilt and a sense of vitality that I had never felt before. Yet the weight of secrecy grew, a boulder that I carried inside me. One day, after a long morning spent on the beach, Marco proposed going back to the hotel for a nap. "You can take a siesta too," he said with a fond smile. But I knew I couldn't stay by his side and ignore the turmoil I felt. As soon as Marco fell asleep, my heart pounded as I grabbed the phone and called Giovanni. "It's time," I said, my voice shaking. Shortly after, Giovanni entered the room, closing the door behind him. The air was filled with a tension that seemed tangible. "We're really crazy," I whispered, my eyes falling on Marco asleep in bed. "But we can't resist," Giovanni replied, moving closer to me. His embrace erased all rational thoughts. I lost myself in him, in his touches, in his kisses that seemed sculpted in time. Every sensation was amplified. Every caress brought with it a wave of emotions that overwhelmed me. But our moment was shattered. A noise, a cough. My heart stopped. Marco had woken up. My hands retreated and Giovanni took a step away, his face tense with concern. "What's going on here?" Marco asked, his tone confused, but with a note of uneasiness that made my blood run cold. The words stuck in my throat, unable to find a way out. "Marco, I tried to start, but my voice was a broken whisper. Giovanni tried to speak, but his words sounded empty, meaningless. The silence in the room was deafening, and my heartbeat sounded like a drum. Marco stared at us, his gaze a mixture of surprise and pain. "Why are you here, John?" he asked, his voice cracking. I tried to find an answer, but all I had were fragments of a truth that couldn't be explained. "Marco, I didn't want to," I began, but he interrupted me. "You didn't want what?" His tone was full of emotion, and in his eyes there was a pain that pierced me. Giovanni tried again to intervene, but nothing could change what had happened. Marco's gaze became harder and harder, and I found myself faced with the stark awareness that nothing would ever be the same again. If this story involved you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episodes. Your every support helps us create increasingly exciting content. Thank you. The frustration in his tone was palpable, a raging river threatening to engulf me, as each unspoken word weighed like a mountain on my heart. I felt like the world was crumbling beneath my feet, leaving me suspended in a void that I didn't know how to fill. "It's not what you think," I tried to say, but the words escaped me, unable to give voice to a truth that even I couldn't fully understand. Luca got out of bed, the confusion and pain in his eyes a reflection of my own emotions, but amplified by the inevitable betrayal. "I think you should leave this room, Giovanni," he said in a tone that brooked no reply. "You need time to think, and I need to figure out what's going on." Giovanni, visibly shaken, nodded and walked away, shooting me a last look full of sadness, a silent farewell that weighed like a boulder. When the door closed behind him, guilt crushed me with devastating force. Luca stared at me, and his look was a question that didn't need words. "Why?" he asked finally, his voice cracking, as if saying that simple word had cost him every bit of strength he had left. "Why did you do this?" His words hit me like hammer blows, raw and inescapable, leaving me breathless. I tried to answer, to make sense of what I had done, but any justification seemed empty. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. "I don't know how it happened. It was a mistake. I don't love you any less. But there was a connection. I couldn't resist." The tears began to flow, each drop a fragment of my remorse. As Luca stopped, his gaze filling with pain and disappointment that pierced my soul. "I think you need to think about what you've done," he said, his tone firm but tinged with a hint of bitterness. "This isn't just a mistake, it's a choice." "Luca, please." I tried to get closer, but he raised a hand to stop me, a gesture that spoke more than 1,000 words. "I need time," he added, and his words were a final blow, breaking me even more. The next few hours passed like days, an eternity of silence filling the air between us. Luca took refuge in his thoughts, while I was trapped in a spiral of emotions: remorse for my betrayal, the fear of losing the man I loved, and that desire that continued to burn inside me, like a fire that never stopped. I was able to turn it off. Every now and then I glanced towards the door, hoping that Giovanni would return, but I knew that his choice to leave was final. My mind wandered, returning to the intimate moments we had shared, each memory shrouded in a veil of sadness and confusion. Finally, I decided to face Luca. I approached the door of his room, my heart heavy, each step an act of courage that seemed impossible to take. I took a deep breath before knocking. "Can I come in?" I asked, my voice shaking, each word a thin thread that I hoped wouldn't break. After a moment of silence, he replied, "Yes, but only for a moment." When I crossed the threshold, I found Luca sitting on the bed, staring into space, as if he were looking for answers in an abyss that only he could see. "I'm listening," he said, his voice emotionless, an empty shell reflecting the weight of everything that had happened. My words came out like a raging torrent, a flow of emotions that I could no longer contain. I told how it all began, how the heat of the moment had taken over, and how every meeting with Giovanni had been a challenge to my conscience. "I don't want to lose what we have," I added, tears streaming down my face, a river of remorse and hope. "I love you, Luca, and I want to work on this." His expression remained serious, impenetrable, a wall I couldn't break. "The fact is, I can't ignore what you've done," he said finally, his voice a mix of pain and determination. "You betrayed me, and I don't know if I can forgive you. But I want to be honest with you. I need time to think about all this." His words hit me like a punch in the stomach, leaving me breathless. "I understand," I replied, trying to hold back the tears, each word an act of surrender. "But please don't close the door completely. I will work on me, on our relationship. I'm ready to do whatever it takes." Luca nodded, but his eyes were full of pain, a mirror of my own torment. "I need time and space. I don't want to make rash decisions, but if I can be honest, our relationship has changed." With a heavy heart, I left the room, knowing that the future we had built together was now hanging by a thin thread. Walking around the hotel terrace, the beauty of the tropical place seemed distant, an echo of something I could no longer touch. After a few days of silence, I received a message from Giovanni. "I've been thinking about what happened," he wrote. "I don't want to be the cause of your suffering, and I think it's best that we move away." An enormous weight fell on my heart, even though the desire for him was still alive. I knew I had to respect his decision and face my reality. After days of discussions with Luca, we decided to return home. The road back was long and full of reflections, a journey that marked the beginning of something new. We were both determined to work on our relationship. I knew it would take time, but I was ready to face the consequences of my actions. In those moments of vulnerability, I understood that true love is not perfect. It is an imperfect journey, and trust must be rebuilt day after day. Luca and I began to talk more openly about our fears and desires, rediscovering the reasons that had brought us together in the beginning. The holiday, which had started with so much promise, had turned into a difficult lesson, but I was ready to face this new phase of my life. Giovanni would have remained a memory, a fragment of a closed chapter, but my choice to return to Luca was the true demonstration of my love. As the sun set on the horizon, I promised myself that I would do my best to rebuild what I had endangered. It wasn't the end, but a new beginning. Life went on, and even though the path would be difficult, I was ready to follow it with determination. If you want to receive new videos of the series, write "I want the sequel" in the comments. If you liked the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel to receive a preview of future publications. Thank you.